Hey guys, this is May, and what you're watching is clip number 4 out of 9 from my webinar, The Second Wave, It's Not Over Yet. Now in this video, we zoom in a little bit more on Southeast Asia, specifically on the countries Malaysia and Indonesia, and also on a different topic altogether, which looks at speech and communication. And much as the Air era has been so closely connected with this idea of texting, messaging, different types of internet up to 3G, 4G, 5G, what have you, even space travel, I think, as I mentioned in the early part of this clip, is that every action usually comes with an equal and an opposite reaction. So we also explore the not so nice part of the Air era. So as we go into communication, one important thing, one theme that we are going to see is that with this ease of communication, there is also a higher chance that people expect much clearer messaging from the government. And what happens when that clear messaging is not forthcoming? So ladies and gentlemen, let's have a look at Malaysia.
Does Air era mean that we are all going to get free speech? Now here, we are going to start centering a little bit more closer to home. We are going to be looking at Southeast Asia now. So if we think about, before we do that, okay, let's just talk a bit about this Aquarius era. And much as a lot has been said about how the Aquarius era is going to have more freedom, there's internet, there's a lot of wonderful technology. Did you guys watch there are all these metaverse videos, VR videos? But at the same time, we also must admit that as with everything in the world, there's the upside, but there's also the ugly side. So therefore, and those of you who do know a bit of astrology, there are certain keywords that are associated with the sign of Aquarius. And let me do a bit of work here to highlight for all of us how this is going to play out in our lives. Now, first of all, we talked about community. And everyone's talking about that now. You're going to have an online community. Even companies are talking about creating communities. Then the question is, how come more and more people are becoming misfits? But along the way, you start seeing a lot of articles about people who have been cyberbullied, people who have been excluded. So that's one pattern that we see. And we also talk about this global galactic kind of identity that we are now Earth people rather than just being a citizen of your country. But at the same time, what the pattern that we saw over the last couple of years, now it's very easy to just say this is COVID, but the isolation is getting stronger and stronger in the sense that even as we look forward, where a lot of us are not going back to the office, you're not going to be seeing your colleagues, face to face like that. And therefore, is the isolation going to build if people are working from home and students are going to school from home? So the isolation is something that we have to accept from this point onwards. And also, even as we talk about authenticity, that we want people to be real, to come clean, but then another word has been coming up, is called artificial. It comes out as artificial intelligence. They're talking about artificial organs, lots and lots of those things. And which one is it really? And even as we talk about freedom, but at the same time, there are a lot of people also saying that, wow, it looks like a lot of these developments are beginning to feel kind of dystopian, right? And we talk about diversity, that we want to accept people of different races and religions. But then more and more, the point of centralization comes out. So here's the new rule, here's what everyone has to do. Everyone has to do the same thing. So what happened to that diversity thing? And then even as we look at how our technology is going to make things very automatic, it makes things faster. And then they're telling you that there's going to be smartphones, smart homes, smart everything. And I sometimes when people ask me about this, I just say that, well, they said the phone was smart. They didn't say you got smarter, right? So that please be very careful here. And then the other thing is that we have automatic, but at the same time, Aquarius can also be about mechanization. That everything becomes very mechanic, and a lot of the human factor, the human judgment is not always there. And even as we talk about groups, us getting in groups, but then another thing is the rise of what we call hegemony. And for the people who are not familiar with this term, hegemony means that yes, there are groups, but there are some groups that are more powerful than other groups. Okay, so that's hegemony. And even as we talk about breaking free, then at the same time, there's also chaos, because how can everybody break free and then still have that nice status quo that we have been used to? And even as we talk about possibility, that we don't know what's going to come out and we want to keep open-minded. But at the same time, yes, you can keep open-minded, but what we now get is unpredictability. So what I want to show you here is a very balanced view, that as we move into the air era, is it going to be one way or the other? I think we have to be quite reasonable here that it will be both. And I think it comes down to each person as an individual, exactly how you want to navigate your experience of the air era. So let's start with something that's a bit easier to resonate with. Let's talk about social media. And I think the last few years, it's just been a meteoric rise of all of that. Look at how many users are on all of these platforms. And so far, it's been, is by and large, despite all the criticisms, actually quite a lot of people have had a positive experience of this. Because let me show you here. Look at all the downloads, millions, billions of downloads for all of these. And if you look down this list, TikTok, Instagram, Zoom, and right now most of you are on Zoom and Facebook watching this webinar. And what has been on the rise is that most of the content that is on all of these platforms are actually created by real people. And the videos, the TikTok videos, and I think it's a new phenomenon that never before have people been able to have such a loud voice that you can actually, there's a lot of stuff that you can share, whether it's like, you know, how kitchen hacks and that kind of stuff too. I think it's great. Now, but at the same time, what we also realize is that as something starts to rise, as something has a power here. Now, for every action, there is an equal and there's an opposite reaction, where as far as free speech is starting to play out in the internet, but we also start to see that in Thailand, headlines like this, COVID-19 clamped down on free speech. And it's not just Thailand, isn't it? It's happening in India. India is clamping down on free speech. Africa is clamping down on free speech. China is clamping down on free speech. And so the thing is, even as the platforms increase, but people have there are more guidelines as to how they can express themselves and how they cannot. And this is a fantastic article that was published on the BBC by Luke Kemp. And it says that history shows that during times of crisis, there are politicians who will reach for more power. So he has also talked about some of these examples, like to monitor rule breakers. 22 countries have used surveillance drones. Their facial recognition programs have been expanded. Internet censorship has occurred in 28 countries. Internet shutdowns in 13. Internet shutdowns in 13. Now, at least 120 contact tracing apps are in use across 71 states. 60 other digital contact tracing measures have been used in across 38 countries. Today our audience comes from more than 23 countries, wherever it is that you're logging in from. And wherever you are, you probably have one of those things on your phone in one form or another. So this is something quite interesting that I found. And if those of you who are more quite interested in press freedom, you can visit this link. I've decided not to show this link in the interest of time, okay? So you can just go search for yourself. It's available on the internet, okay? But do this after the webinar, yeah? Okay, so now we're going to zoom in, okay, into specific things, patterns that we start to see in these countries. Now, I'm going to explain here that even as we start looking at country charts, I want everyone to be quite reasonable, okay? Now, just because I'm saying that patterns are happening in the US or in the UK or in Malaysia or God knows where, that you have to understand that the country is a very big place and there's like millions and millions of people. So when things occur, it doesn't mean that everyone gets affected. Is everyone clear with that? So that means you want to be able to sort of distill it down to your industry, your lives, and then to decide for yourself, how far is this going to affect you? Okay, everyone clear? So let's go into the charts here. Okay, to preface what has been happening in the last 1 year or so, here are some of the headlines that I found when I was doing my internet research. That it says here that Malaysia could have its free speech under increasing threat. That was in May of this year. And in April, 1 month before, repressive laws trigger massive press freedom decline for Malaysia. So this is not something that I'm making up. It's been happening for the last 1 year or so. So if we look at the chart here, first of all, this line that cuts across number 4 and number 10 is essentially, the 4th is at the bottom, which is like regular people like you and me. And then at the very top here is, usually it refers to things like authority figures. So when you have a line like that, it can be discourse, it can be a negotiation between the regular people and the authority figures. And so there's another line here, but I'll get to it. So what you see here is the rise of a bit of idealism on the ground. Because this planet here, Neptune, simply means that people are there are a lot of ideas that are circulating among the people. And this begins, as you can see here, it actually begins strongly from about April onwards in 2022. So there are a lot of idealisms about roots, about beliefs, about spirituality. That means on the ground, we need to redefine perhaps like, what does it mean to be a Malaysian? And then, but you find that a lot of these ideas that are coming up may be very opposed to what might be a very practical and a pragmatic perspective from the authorities' side. Basically, you have two parties that see the same situation with very different perspectives. And also, you find that the people on the ground may resonate quite well with some of the radical ideas and perspectives. Now, at this point, I want to be very, very clear here that for a lot of people, you may jump to conclusions. So when you see things like the word radical ideas, then if I link it to beliefs and spirituality, now here's the not very good thing to do, yeah? You don't want to immediately jump to the conclusion that it's like, oh, it's radical something, okay? So no, it doesn't have to be. So if you notice, like in the US example, when I talk about radical beliefs, it's not always of a political nature. Sometimes it's simply people feeling like we want to define ourselves in a different way, okay? So guys, please don't jump to conclusions. And that this new pattern that we see here is going to be strongest in the end part of 2023. Okay, so that means even though it starts in April, it doesn't mean that things start happening from April onwards, that it's going to start building up in terms of this conversation in Malaysia. Then on top of that, when we look at anything that is crossing this number 3 section here, has to do with communication, data, the news that you read, the stories that you read. And Saturn here, this little brown planet here, sorry, just let me get my cursor out. This brown planet here can mean that there are a lot of guidelines, and Saturn can mean it's quite strict and it's quite structured. So the pattern that I see here is that communication could get more control. So this is a pattern that begins from April of next year, and it will last for the rest of the year. So you might find that certain messages, data, video, intellectual content might go into further restrictions. And on top of that, that red line over there suggests that there's some kind of official decision or a statement that will come from the authorities that will be very, very, it will probably show up just about the end of September and the early part of October in the coming year. Okay, don't worry, I'll show you all a timeline shortly, okay? And then, on top of that, okay, so besides just this line here, now if these discussions between the regular people and the authorities are not settled, the result that will come out of it here might be some unfriendliness, okay? So could there be some kind of conflict? Could there be some kind of backlash and anger? Now, again, I want to emphasize that something that occurs in a country does not affect everyone. Just because an event occurs does not mean everyone is involved, okay? So that when we see this seems to be quite strong in the later half of 2022, and it might sort of move into the first quarter of the following year. So there could be people who are not happy with how the conversation is going. And at first, it will rise strongly. So what you will notice is that this discord might be strongest in that October, November period of this year. And after that, it will fade off in energy. Okay, but that doesn't mean it disappears completely. So let's look at how it all fits on the timeline. So first of all, in April, the idealism rises. And quite quickly after that, a lot of controls will start showing up to deal with the idealism. And then around the same time, there could be some opposing voices, okay, that might be quite uncomfortable. And like I said, that there might be some kind of official decision or a statement that might be made in the third quarter of the year. And it does look like the reaction to that might not be so friendly in all areas of Malaysia. Okay, so now at this point, I want to pause here, okay, because I'm doing my job as an astrologer, okay, but this is not to necessarily like scare people. But what I want everyone to understand is that for most of you, you are not involved in this, right? This is just a political situation. But for the average person who runs a business and you are like a regular guy doing your thing, so that's where you want to be able to think about how do you keep your operations running, okay, even as some things don't work so well. that you want to make sure that your goods and your services are still serving your customers. Okay, so please be clear between events and implication. You can't change the event, but you can change the implications of how it's going to affect your life. Okay, everyone clear? So the next thing is that is how it's going to affect people on an emotional basis. So what I want to emphasize to all of you now, Malaysia has got the moon. The moon is emotions. And when it's in Scorpio, sometimes it is when, in times of crisis, you find that the tendency for people to react in somewhat extreme ways can be quite strong. And when the moon is in the 12th house, one of the things about Malaysia is that you could find that the people could be quite prone to feeling sad and discouraged quite easily. And this is something that we have to look at and address because some of the events could be quite distressing to the people on the ground. So what we see here is there are a few ways to describe this. Yeah, it's a pattern that I see coming out from about the 19th of May onwards in the middle of the year. And I'll start with the negative and then I'll show you the positive. Okay, so the negative part is that could there be a little bit more depression and disillusionment? And one of the things that you want to look out for, okay, so please, if you live or work in Malaysia, what you want to do is, if you are looking to support the community, make sure that people are supported, make sure that there are ways for people to sort of share and reach out if they are not feeling so great. So that the issue is that when people are feeling sad, it can be you can be very easily susceptible. You can be very gullible to a lot of ideas that may not be serving for them. Now, the positive part that comes out of this, which I think we have actually seen happening also in Malaysia, is that people are capable of a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion and helping the disadvantaged. So what this means is that a lot of this support might be coming from the community. And this again, emphasizing the positive part of the Aquarius era, is that I think we start to see ourselves as not drawing lines between I'm this and you are that, but rather to see that, well, if there's a situation, we all in it, and then we can support each other, okay? So that, and this could be strongest in the middle part of the year. Okay, so one more thing is, in fact, we start to see some indications of this. This is a headline that I saw that was going on in Malaysia of this year. Desperate Malaysians are flying the white flag. This was known as the white flag movement in Malaysia as a call for help to survive in the COVID-19 lockdown. Okay, so and what was very heartening is that a lot of the action that was being taken was on the grassroots, and people, regular people, aunties and uncles, were stepping up to help their neighbors. All right. Okay, then the next is again affecting their emotions, is that a lot of your emotional expression could feel very blocked. So that means it is quite possible that a lot of the avenues that people go to get help might not be so open. And if you notice just now, what I'll show you again later, but you'll see that the start date is about the same, and it says 19th of May. And so far in my experience, that when the dates are very close together, it's quite often that the pattern affects around the same time. Yeah, okay, so it's the ability to reach out is blocked from people. They might feel very unheard. And remember what I talked about, the ugly side of the Aquarius side is that there are people in isolation. There are people who are going to be misfits. So there will be a lot of emotional resentment. Okay, and again, it is strong in that May and June period. So this is where I'm going to add on to the timeline just now, that just around the time where a lot of people are speaking out, and you find that there could be people who are reacting to what is being discussed. Now, do I know what is going to be discussed? I don't, because the astrology chart does not tell me what will be discussed. All I can see is the effect that it has on people. So I know that people are going to be upset. So which is why, for the rest of you who understand what's going on, let's keep people grounded, okay? And that in about June, July, that's when emotional expression is blocked. We want to find ways, even if it's not the usual WhatsApp and the Facebook, find ways for people to sort of get together. Okay, so that's something, and you can start preparing for that early. Don't wait until things happen and then you start preparing, and that's not smart. Okay, the whole point of being in a forecast webinar is so that you know beforehand what's going to happen, right? Okay, then now for the purpose of this webinar, I know that people will be concerned. Okay, so for Malaysia, I went an extra step. Okay, I didn't just do 2022, I also took a glance at 2023. So please allow me to give you a glance of what are some of the patterns that I see in the following year. that, so again, when we have an opposition like this that cuts across number 4 and number 10, it describes the relationship between the people and an authority figure. Now, this combination here, I know some of you watching this are astrologically trained. Many of you are my students. And you will see that when you have Saturn at the bottom and Pluto at the top, I'll be very frank here, these are not friendly planets. So the pattern I see here, it could be a clamping down on the freedom of people. So this kind of clamping down can come in whatever forms. It doesn't specifically say here in the chart, but it does look like it is connected with communication. All right, so this is a pattern that doesn't begin next year. Don't panic yet, okay? But this is a pattern that I see coming on March of 2023, and it will last for almost a year. The people on the ground might not be so happy with the control that is coming in, and there'll be a lot of facing authority figures, and it will be strongest towards the end of the year, following year. And one other pattern here is this green line here. And those of you who do know astrology, now Pluto is, well, its nice part is it's a transformation thing, but Pluto is also the god of death, of power, of domination. And when this planet is in the number 3 house, and the 3rd house, number 3, is for communication. So that's where I think the freedom issues will show up in this area. And what I think is that some channels for messaging, some channels for communication might not work as well as you expect them to be. So that, and the fact that both of these show up in March tells you that usually it's not a coincidence like when my calculations come out so close, okay? So that they could shut down data and they could shut down information. So for the people who are running businesses, right, who have families, please make sure the communication continues, okay? And that's where that will happen in the middle part of 2023. So just to make things easier for you to see and understand, I've put it on the timeline. So if you see J23 here, so everything that's from here onwards is from 2023. That I see here that freedom is going to be limited and that potentially messages could be shut down.
And now, before we go into looking at Indonesia, I think it's also important to see that the themes might sound kind of similar as you watch the video, but I think the themes have a bit of the differences. Now, the first is that Malaysia's situation tends to move more into this sense of a miscommunication, while the story that we see in Indonesia has a lot more to do with control.
Indonesia. And I want to show you some of the patterns first, okay? So this one begins this year, and you find that anything that affects this planet here, now Jupiter is a planet of, it describes a lot of positive things like intellectual discussion, learning, sharing, broadcasting, people sharing their ideas with each other. So what happens here is there is a series of listings, astrological calculations that is affecting this planet, this Jupiter planet in the year 2022. So the pattern that you are going to see for this year is not going to so much affect the people per se, but for those of you who live and work in Indonesia, if I turn out to be quite accurate for 2022, then you definitely want to pay attention to what I'm saying about 2023. Okay, so if you look at March 2022 here, I've written here impactful discourse and journalism. So I think a lot of people are going to be covering very crucial information from here. So you find that this discourse, this journalism is very impactful on the people. And a lot of it is, the suggestion here, because it's in the number 12 house, a lot of it is going to be hidden. So hidden doesn't mean that it's all secret and stuff, but perhaps all it means is that it's maybe not on conventional media, that's what it means, okay? And that it will address a lot of power-related topics, and it will be quite strong in the second quarter of this upcoming year. And then on top of that, see this red line here that connects between the number 6 house to the number 12 house, and again it hits this Jupiter here. So this particular one talks about like victimhood, and it's not always a very friendly position, because it means that there are certain rules that will stop this journalism. So what I see here is that there's a bit of legal opposition to discourse that I think it's, if you happen to be watching this and you're a journalist in Indonesia, please take very good care of yourself, okay? And this is more likely to rise in the second half of 2022. So on one hand, the positive thing is that because of the impact, you'll find that broadcasting and information will spread quickly in Indonesia. But also just as quickly, there will be a lot of legislation that will oppose this journalism, and it will become strong in the last part of 2022. Okay, so let's put this on the timeline. So starting from about March onwards, you should see that the impactful journalism will start to rise, and it is black color, yeah? And adding on to a few other things, I want to pay attention to where it's quite strong here in May and June. So you should see some of the patterns showing up. It could be new guidelines about what you can report on and what you can't report on. Okay, so that's for those who stay in Indonesia, please take note of this. Somewhere in September, so some of these I won't go into detail, but in September there could be some another round of rules. Okay. Now, one of the headlines that I saw, this I didn't make this up. I got this off the internet. That in October 27, that's just about less than a month ago, right? And this is what the press is saying about media and telecommunications in Indonesia. That apparently, I have to admit, I'm sheltered, so I didn't know what happened here. But it seems that there was a pattern of Indonesia blocking the internet amidst social unrest, lawful. What I'm trying to show you here is that there was social unrest. The internet was blocked. Okay, let me repeat. The internet was blocked, and it has been ruled lawful that they can do this. Okay, so I'm just telling you this. So similarly for Malaysia, I thought that my audience would like me to take a glance at what are some of the patterns that might come up in 2023. So in 2022, it's mostly going to impact people who are reporting and people who are journalists. But I think in 2023, a lot of these patterns hit something else. So when you have Mercury is a planet of communication. And when it's in the 11th house, some of it can refer to parliament, but it can also refer to the masses. So it's in a way, I call this mass communication, all right? And it's possible that by 2023, you'll find that the blockages will extend all the way out to mass communications. So it affects things like the media, social media. Media is the official one, social media is the stuff that we post on internet, yeah? Okay, and all this will become strong in the last quarter of 2023. So what this means is that it doesn't fully happen in March, and it will just build up to the end of the year. Okay, and another pattern is what I see here. Now, when we have Pluto, now earlier in Malaysia, where we saw that Pluto was in the 3rd house, in Indonesia is in the 4th. So the 4th will mean like basically it's our normal lives, our daily lives with our families, with our homes and that kind of stuff. And you'll find that the same level of control is going to show up in people's lives. And sometimes it could be shut down or a denial of communication, of mass communications. Now, sometimes it's not directly done. There are a lot of other, the chart suggests that it's indirect. I also don't know what does it mean by indirect, but I'm just telling you what the chart actually says. And this will start to play out quite early on. As you can see, this period begins in 24th of March and it is strong from the start. Okay, so that you should start to see quite a lot of new rules showing up. So let me add this to the timeline. And in 2023, from about March onwards, you can find like the pattern here seems to be mostly for communications. 2022 is about journalists. The 2023 is going to go out to mass communication. Okay, so I think a lot of the messages that I had for those of us who live and work in Malaysia, I will also extend to Indonesia. And again, like I said, please pay attention to what's happening in other countries because it's very easy to say that, oh, it's happening there, it's not my problem. And guys, I think we want to see ourselves as global citizens now. We are all people, okay? And I'd like to show you this this article that I found on the internet, and that some journalists have started suggesting, okay, that post-pandemic authoritarianism is looming in Indonesia. Okay, so and some people have talked about a crackdown on government critics, and it hasn't let up. Okay, so I don't live in Indonesia, but I believe yeah. So that those of you who live there, please keep communications open, not because of any nefarious purposes, but because we have businesses, we have things to do, and people need to be taken care of, and family members need to connect to each other. So it doesn't really matter all this political stuff, but the people on the ground, you have to keep your lives going. Okay, so please, I'm telling you this ahead of time. There is plenty of time to prepare, and there's a lot of things that small business owners and educated people on the ground can do for each other. Okay.
Now, given the forecast that we see for Malaysia and Indonesia, it's quite clear that a lot of people are very concerned about the continuity of communication and of our daily activities. So for our friends who live in these two countries, one thing I'd like to suggest is to recognize the importance of community, to sort of recognize the people who are around us, people who live and work with us, and that it's quite amazing of how much people can support each other, even if your usual forms of digital communication are more restricted. So given what we see in the patterns on our charts, some people are very concerned about, will there be a lot more unrest in that world? And on our next video, we're going to tackle that very difficult topic.